Hello, hi everyone, welcome back to Woo Can Cook. As you may have noticed, today we are in fact not cooking anything at all, but instead continuing our series dedicated to food travels and adventures of all kinds, with part 2 of our time spent in Taipei, Taiwan earlier this year. For those who didn't catch it, if this feels a little bit out of context, a few weeks ago we explored the first few days of our trip in Taiwan, including stops at the Beito Hot Springs, Tom Sui Fisherman's Wharf, the Dihua Night Market, and Taroko Gorge, so definitely check out the first video too if you haven't yet. Okay, so let's get back into it. Okay, so diving right back in, by day 5 I was pretty much over the jet lag, so I went for another run along the river, this time during the daylight finally, which looked pretty different. I was planning on running to this cool looking building, which turned out to be a famous hotel that a lot of diplomats have stayed at, but I actually got lost and accidentally wandered into what I think was an active military base where they were pretty mad at me for filming stuff. Don't do any of this, y'all. They were pretty mad. I did end up stumbling across the Martyrs Memorial though, where I caught the honor guard doing some morning drill practices, which was pretty cool, but at this point I wasn't really sure what would or would not get me arrested for filming, so I took off before I could really find out. On the way home, I stopped at this spot called the Morning Bar, which despite the name being in English, is absolutely a locals only spot because not a single other word of English was spoken here. Most people seem to just be picking up the grab-and-go sandwiches and danbing on their way to work, which was what I grabbed, and it was pretty tasty. After breakfast, we dedicated the day to checking out Taipei 101, which is known as the tallest building in Taiwan. It's mostly just a shopping mall unless you pay for the observatory deck, which we didn't do. We did discover though that you can just go up to the observatory deck lobby where there's some pretty cool displays going on, including this flower arch thing, again which you've probably seen on Instagram a million times if you're like me. On the ground floor of Taipei 101 though is also a famous dumpling place called Din Tai Fung. The wait times here were pretty long. I think we waited something like 45 minutes to an hour, but we just walked around the mall until our number got called, which was fine. We ended up stumbling on this Kavalan tasting bar in the mall, which is a pretty popular Taiwanese whiskey that does Scotch-styled whiskey. It's nothing mind-blowing, but if you're into Scotch though, it might be worth checking out because they do some fun cask finishes with PX, sherry, and bourbon casks, not unlike how a lot of famous Scotches are finished. Anyway, Din Tai Fung had been pretty hyped up for me both on social media and from my friends, and honestly, it still lived up to the hype. These were probably the best xiaolonbaos that I think I have come across maybe ever, with the added bonus that they were doing a lot of really interesting interpretations of xiaolonbao too. Like this truffle oil soup dumpling that was I think like $6 or $7. It was so expensive that we only got one of them. Also, these red bean dessert dumplings were pretty good too. Then they had these glutinous sticky rice shumai, which were really good too. On top of all of this, they also had really good noodles, some steamed buns, dessert buns, and a bunch more other stuff too. So yeah, worth the wait, and also it was not that expensive either. Around the corner from Taipei 101 is a cool preserved village called Sisinan, where we found some neat shops set up in the preserved structures. It's also pretty conveniently placed right in the eye line of the Taipei 101 skyline too, so again, there were lots of people taking pictures for the gram, I mean myself included. I mean, look at this shot. This is a really cool shot, you know. As a side note, it was at this point that I also started to notice that for some reason places in Taiwan have radically misunderstood what constitutes a burger. This beginning my week-long obsession with finding burgers in Taiwan, like this sweet and sour duck breast burger and then a passion fruit squid burger. Then this is a roast beef burger and I think an orange chicken burger from Moss Burger. And then on top of all of this, this is just straight up a fried chicken sandwich burger. Like, what's going on? Anyway, after all of this, we stopped by this mall called the ATT for Fun store, which is known for having a Pokemon Center inside of it, but as it turns out, apparently you need a reservation even to just get into the store, which sells out as soon as they open up every morning. Pretty lame. So as a consolation, we went and checked out the arcade inside of the mall instead, which is honestly pretty cool that the malls here still have arcades. I discovered that I can still shoot a free throw, and then we noticed that a lot of people were playing this DDR-style dancing game that you play with your hands called Mai Mai. These guys looked intimidatingly good at this game though, like they were professionals. They brought their own gloves to play it, which is next level, so I didn't even try it. Ending the night, we hit the Shilin Nightmarket, which was the first true night market that we did all trip. Shilin is pretty popular on Instagram, but honestly, I thought it was kind of overrated. They've got a lot of space that's dedicated to carnival-style games that I wasn't too interested in, and also the diversity of food was kind of lacking too. We did get a giant piece of fried chicken from Hot Star that was pretty good though, and also this Taiwanese roast beef and raclette was well worth the $5 that it cost. We also found some pretty good matcha egg tarts from this lady who was super stoked to see us and had us sign the side of her booth, which was fun. Then I found some stinky chou tofu here that was pretty good too, which was actually somehow only the second time that I came across this the entire trip. The last time I was in Taiwan 15 years ago, this stuff was on every single corner. My dad said it's becoming more rare here because it's too difficult to make, which is really sad. Other than all of this though, we hit this Michelin recommended noodle spot that was kind of overrated. Then we got the world's longest French fry, which again was just a French fry, and we found a disproportionate amount of fried squid and seafood, which was pretty odd. And we also saw this 3D tiger billboard that's also all over Instagram too. Then, no lie, this was the very first trash can that I found in the entire night market, where literally thousands of people are consuming food from disposable containers, but for some reason there's no trash on the ground anywhere. It's pretty insane. The next day, I started to get pretty obsessed with all of these abandoned luxury hotels everywhere, which seemed really dystopian and awesome to me for some reason. Like, I don't know how these are happening, but there's like 3 or 4 of them around our hotel. In any case, we ended up dedicating the entire day to visiting the Jiufen Nightmarket, which is probably the thing that you have seen floating around Instagram more than anything else because it's the area that inspired the architecture pictured in the Miyazaki film Spirited Away. Getting to Jiufen requires catching the Taiwan Rail or TRA, which is sort of like the Taiwan equivalent of the Amtrak train here in the States. Just like the Amtrak, the TRA goes to way more places outside of Taipei, so it's a lot more complicated to navigate than the inner city MRT rail. We almost got on the wrong train here, but then this nice lady helped us find the right train, which actually also turned out to be the wrong train, but we managed to catch the right train before getting on it though, which was good. Inside of the TRA station is also more train station bento boxes from my mom's childhood, which they sell in these preserved vintage train cars, which was pretty cool too. Once again, another pretty good bento box, although kind of difficult to eat on the train because there's not really a dining car on board. In any case, if you are planning a day trip to Jiufen, there are 3 other spots that I would definitely recommend hitting up on the way there, some of which are pretty touristy and some are not. We caught the TRA to get us to a small outskirt town called Riufang. Riufang is widely known as a pickup spot for tourists to get to Jiufen, so you'll see a line of cabs waiting outside the station to take you there. Tucked inside of Riufang though is a sweet little food hall where we found some of the best food that we had all trip, including these black pepper buns which they bake by sticking to the side of one of these big high heat kilns, which is really awesome. We also got some taro milk made from fresh pressed taro, then some fried rice, whatever this thing is. I think my mom called it a Taiwanese meatball. In any case, don't sleep on the Riufang food hall because it was kind of my favorite part of this day. From Riufang, we caught a cab that took us to another town called Shifen, which is known for having a series of increasingly impressive waterfalls. This area was pretty touristy, but it was also a pretty cool waterfall too though, so I don't know. Once you do get to the biggest and most impressive waterfall though, there's an observatory deck that goes up 1 level so that you can see the waterfall a little bit better. For whatever reason when we were there, nobody seemed to be using this observatory deck, so when you come here you should definitely use it because nobody was here and it was a much better view. There's also some pretty cool statues like these dragons that I thought were interesting, plus some more food and knickknacks to buy. We got a hot dog on a stick, which was really tasty, and then another suspension bridge, which was, again, not my favorite thing. In any case, on the way out, the person behind us mentioned that the way that we came will take you to the route that allows cars on the road, which is going to have a lot more people going because it's where all of the signs point you to. He mentioned that we should instead turn in the other direction, which is just for pedestrian traffic. This route had way fewer people on it, and it was one of the best views of the entire part of this area. So shout out to whoever that guy was that was walking behind us because that was a good tip. In any case, from Shifen, we caught a cab to an area called Old Street, which you may have also seen on Instagram for the lantern lighting that happens here. Basically, you write down what you want to have good luck with this year, and then they light the lantern on fire and it just floats away, kind of like a hot air balloon. What you don't see on Instagram though is that this is also an active railroad, which means that every hour on the hour, a train passes by here and everyone just sort of dashes out of the way of the train, which, I mean, seems pretty safe. Also, what happens to the balloons when they land? Aren't they still on fire? I don't know. I also got this thing that I can only describe as an ice cream burrito. They make these using a thin crepe skin, then top it with shaved peanut brittle, which was one of my favorite desserts of the whole trip too. Anyway, from Shifen Old Street, you can catch another cab to Jiufen, or if you're lucky, you can just find a cab driver who would be willing to drive you to all 3 of these locations and wait for you at each one, which is what we did. Most of the cab drivers are going to be pretty willing to do this because it means that they won't have to hustle for rides as much, which is nice for them too. Cabs are also pretty cheap out here too. I think we paid something like $50 in USD for a driver to hang out with us the whole day and take us back to our hotel. On top of all of this, according to our driver, the alternative is a bus that heads back to the city from Jiufen, but it only comes once an hour and legally they can't allow standing room, so if you miss it or it's full, you're staying in Jiufen for the night. In any case, inside of Jiufen is a labyrinth of small shops and vendors, which was pretty cool to wander around. There's lots of small bites and little knickknacks to check out and eat, which we definitely did a lot of here. I also accidentally wandered into this secret garden looking thing behind a shop selling plum wine, which was pretty neat, although I think it may have actually been somebody's backyard, I'm not really sure. At the end of the maze of vendors is a tea house, which is the house that inspired the bathhouse from Spirited Away, so you'll see a lot of people taking photos of the tea house here too. My mom also pointed out though that literally behind the spot that people are standing in to take the photo of the tea house is a statue that's dedicated to the actual history of Jiufen. Jiufen, or translated 9 shares, was founded by 9 families who were mining gold, which is why there's gold mining statues everywhere, like this one. Day 7, we had a bit of an off day planned, so I took advantage of our free time to make my way to the Taiwan National Archive Center to investigate this mysterious photo of my grandpa, pictured on the far left here, standing behind the famous military revolutionary leader Chiang Kai-shek. We have no other information about his military record, what he did in the war, or what the f is this picture, Grandpa? I know that we found this photo after he died inside of a standard issue KMT Taiwanese Air Force wallet that he gave me when I was, I think, about 4 years old. This is the same wallet that I've been carrying around for the last 30 years with no other real information about what it is, or more importantly, how it is that I came to be Taiwanese. Quick history lesson, Chiang Kai-shek is the military leader that led the Kuomintang, or KMT, in the 1930s and 40s. The party famously fled to Taiwan in the late 40s, at which point many left for America shortly after this. This is how many Taiwanese Americans, including myself, have ended up with family heritage in Taiwan that only traces back by about 70 or 80 years or so. After that, most of our family history traces back to mainland China. So, on a long shot, I went to the Taiwan National Archives to show them this picture, and unsurprisingly, they could not really help me very much without more information. Apparently, the name Wang is pretty difficult to just look up in the archives. I left pretty disappointed, but I did connect with someone from the archives who, not long after we left, somehow miraculously managed to dig up an archive of my grandpa's classroom record when he was at the Taiwan Central Aviation School, seen here. So, today I learned that my grandpa was a mechanic in the KMT Air Force out of Shandong Boping in 1936. Right now, I'm also in touch with the person who transcribed this archive classroom record, whom I believe has additional photos of my grandpa as well as more information on where he was stationed. So, yeah, that's where I come from, I guess. Anyway, after that, we met up with a friend of ours who happened to be in Taipei at the same time, which is always fun to do when we're traveling. We ended up grabbing a drink at a cool Copenhagen brewery called Mikeller back in the Dihua district. Mikeller used to have a great spot in San Francisco that closed recently, so we were pretty familiar with this brewery. The Taiwanese popcorn chicken here was pretty underwhelming, which I guess I should have seen coming, but the beer was still pretty good though. This I think was a black tea lager, which was very tasty. After that, we were right around the corner from the Taipei main station, which is well known for having an underground shopping mall in the train station, which is very much an understatement. What it actually is miles and miles of shops and food stalls that forms a literal labyrinth of things to do and see inside of a freaking train station. We ended up just literally picking a noodle shop at random, which was the one that didn't have a line, which ended up being this place called the Master of Spicy Noodles. We got some pretty good beef noodle soup here, which I was pretty happy about. It also turned out that this place has 2 other locations in Taiwan that are super popular with huge lines, but for some reason no one seems to know about this space in the mall location, probably because it's buried in an underground labyrinth, so that was pretty sweet. On our last full day in Taipei, we were all pretty tired at this point from the enormous amounts of walking that we had been doing, so we didn't do a whole lot, but we did manage to check out this pretty cool weekend pop-up flea market called Popop Taipei in the Nangong district. Nangong is sort of on the outskirts of Taipei, so it definitely felt like there were fewer tourists out here. My dad also pointed out that he lived off of Zhongshan Road out here when he was a kid, which was a cool connection to make too. I thought this flea market was pretty cool, lots of old interesting pieces on display and for sale, a couple folks selling a huge assortment of Godzilla figures, this giant collection of Miyazaki figurines, then this dude casually standing next to this 660s era BMW, this guy with a wild Dieter Rams display. I ended up scoring this vintage Taiwan beer carrier for the drinks case at our new space, which is kinda cool. I also finally stumbled on an actual normal burger from these folks at Savory Bistro, who had set up a flat top in the back of what I think was a vintage VW camper. Respect, my dudes. Also, really good burger. Afterward, I started to realize that we were rapidly running out of available meals that we could feasibly still eat in Taiwan, so we decided to go to this spot called Yuanfang Guabao, which is inside of the Huaxi Nightmarket. A friend of mine had told me that if there's one thing that you eat in Taiwan, it needs to be this guabao, so we did. We had 6 of them, actually. Yuanfang has been on the Michelin guide for I think the last 4 years, which at this point I've sort of started to lose faith in because I've now been to a few different spots that were pretty hyped up, but these guys are definitely doing it right though. I personally haven't had a lot of guabao in my life because they're somewhat hard to come by here in the Bay, but I did eat a pretty underwhelming one at the airport later, which made me appreciate this masterpiece even more. Finally, before we headed home, another friend of mine recommended that we hit ChiaTe for their pineapple cakes, which had also gotten pretty hyped up for me too. My friend said that they're the most popular and most touristy pineapple cakes in Taiwan, but they're also still his favorite too. I think I might be a little bit more partial to the cakes that we found at a spot in Jiufen, but I will say that these were the softest and flakiest pineapple cakes that I think I've ever had though. They also had a cool variety of other cakes like these mochi red bean ones or this Nangong cake that I think was my favorite. They're also all individually wrapped, so we brought a bunch back home for friends too. On our last day in Taipei, our flight out was actually pretty close to midnight, so we did have some time left, but our checkout time at the hotel was pretty early though, so there wasn't a whole lot that we could do once we had all of our luggage in tow. The one thing that we could do was go to the hotel buffet at the Grand Mayful called Palette. Their buffet is pretty popular and it definitely had a feeling like everybody was mad dashing to grab up as much food as possible in the 3 hours that their lunch hour was open for, but I think it was still pretty worth it though. We were sticking here to strict buffet rules and exclusively eating only the expensive and high-value things that we could find, so no carbs and no liquids. After that, we still had a solid 6 or 7 hours left to kill, but we just headed to the airport because we had heard that the Taoyuen airport has a massive amount of shops and bites to check out. We also still had upgraded tickets, so we ended up hanging out in this premium lounge for a bit, where we got some pretty decent lurofen and udon. By the time we had finally gotten on the plane, we were honestly pretty exhausted at this point, which is great because I ended up sleeping for the entire 11-hour return flight minus these fairly mediocre airplane meals now that we were back in economy. Also, as a side note, I think it's pretty wild that the return flight is a full 4 hours shorter than the flight to Taipei. Science. And yeah, that's it, home sweet home in SFO. I do particularly want to thank Tracy Lee from the Taiwan National Archives for absolutely going above and beyond in helping me track down the records of my grandfather. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that I just walked into a random government building and asked for help finding someone named Wang, and she was able to turn anything up at all.